Okay, all right. So this is going to be our introduction to Cisco XDR. I'm Matt. I'm a technical leader on the TME team for XDR. We're going to start with an overview of XDR, talk about kind of what the product is, what it's designed to do, and kind of the higher level concepts of what an XDR is intended to accomplish. We'll then talk about the extended part of extended detection and response and what that context means. That'll lead us into detections. So taking all that context that we have available, generating detections from it. And then, of course, once we have detections, we want to talk about response. So not just having visibility into everything, but having the ability to actually respond and have a meaningful impact on whatever it is that's going on in the environment. And then we'll finish up with some resources. So first, what is extended detection and response? So this is a pretty common industry term now. There's a lot of vendors using the XDR acronym. We're not the only ones, we're not the first ones. But essentially, extended detection and response is a collection of detections and telemetry from multiple different technologies or sensors or things across your environment. So the idea is let's take all of the existing products that you have, let's take all the existing detections and telemetry, bring them as close together as possible, and generate more high fidelity detections. So the more data we have from more different types of systems, whether that's from firewall, whether that's from endpoint, whether it's from email, right? We want to bring all these different technologies closer together so that we have richer context and richer detections. We can then apply advanced analytics to those things. So not only do we bring all this data together, but then we apply analytics across all of it. So we collect the data, we normalize it, and then we use that to produce correlated events. So being able to say there was a machine that was compromised, but maybe that compromise started because of an email, and maybe our email gateway saw that email and where it came from, and kind of putting the building blocks and pieces together of an incident. So we have a much better visibility end to end. And then, of course, guided response. So being able to say, okay, we've investigated, we've brought the context together, we've generated a detection, let's do something about it. And we don't want customers to have to go out into every single product and do that. We want to be able to give them a guided playbook that gives them some explanation as to what kinds of actions they can take and gives them a very simple execute button, essentially, to run those responses. When we look at modern attacks, these are not single system or single platform or single technology attacks, right? These are very complicated things. When we talk about something like ransomware, we could have something coming in through email, we could have a link that goes to a questionable website, then that's taking the user somewhere strange, maybe downloading a file, and we've got some process injection happening or something, being installed on the machine. Then it spreads. So then that machine's talking to other machines, and you might have remote exploitation and all sorts of other kind of naughty, malicious things going on here. But what you'll notice is this is very cross-domain. This is very cross-technology and cross-vendor, right? So you could have email from vendor A, DNS from vendor C, and so on. And the point of XDR is to bridge these gaps, to be able to bring these vendors more closely aligned, to bring them together, and then, of course, give you that visibility that you need across these different domains, whether it's email, DNS, endpoint, and so on. So we want to be able to stop more advanced attacks that bridge different systems more quickly by bringing this context together. We say an XDR is as good as its outcomes, and these are five kind of core or pivotal outcomes that we've defined for our XDR product. So again, XDR is an industry term, but for Cisco XDR, these are the five primary outcomes we want our customers to achieve. So first, detect sooner. So reducing time to detect, reducing the amount of time it takes for your environment to realize that there is a maliciousness and for someone to be informed about that. We can then extend asset context, so that helps us determine what is the scope of the attack. How quickly can we determine where that attack has spread, what assets have been impacted, and even what are the importance of those assets? Are they a copier sitting in a hallway, or is it the CEO or the CIO's personal computer or something like that? So really determining what is that asset relevance. Prioritizing all of this data by impact is kind of a follow-up to that. So are we having systems impaired that are material to the operations of our business, right? So if a printer's offline because someone has hijacked it with some weird malware, is that really so important as maybe a finance or payroll server being taken down, or a web server or a database server or something like that? So not just understanding the context of the asset and maybe who the user is, but the actual purpose of that machine. And then we want visibility. We want to reduce the time to investigate. It's not enough just to have a detection, but an analyst is then going to have to do some amount of work to determine what actually happened here and investigate and pull that data together. And that requires full visibility, right? Full, reliable visibility across products, across domains, and being able to reduce the time it takes to determine, was there actually maliciousness or not? And what is the action that needs to be taken as a result? And that leads finally to accelerating response, which is, can we respond? How quickly can we respond? And how confidently can we respond? So making sure not only that the analyst has a destroy button that they can click and say, kick this machine off the network or block this domain or whatever the case is, but can they click that button confidently? Do they have the information? Do they have the context? Do they have all of the stuff they need available to them to not only make that decision, but then can Cisco XDR empower them to actually take that action and execute it? And of course, the answer is yes. This is the high-level architecture, and we've broken it down by those kind of three letters of our acronym. So we have the extended, the detection, and the response. Everything starts on the extended side, and this is where, again, we have this multi-vector telemetry coming in from different vendors, different technologies, different types of products. So bringing together cloud, network, email, identity, bringing together different vendors. Obviously, we have a really strong support for Cisco products, but in the EDR space, for example, we can also support bringing in data and things from CrowdStrike and SentinelOne, Microsoft Defender, and some others. So there's a constantly evolving catalog of integrations, but everything in XDR starts with one of these integrations. It starts with data or detections coming into the platform. And that data comes in multiple different forms, whether it's raw telemetry into a data lake, whether they're events, whether it's threat intelligence about whether a domain is malicious or suspicious. We have device context coming in from endpoint and device management platforms like Jamf and Microsoft Intune. So all of that data, all of those things are feeding into our analytics engine, and then we can generate detections. So looking for behavioral analytics, anomalies, attack chaining, then we can prioritize the incidents, we can create the incidents, we can score them so that analysts have a better understanding of the actual impact of the incident. And then during that process, we have automatic enrichment where we can actually go back to the source products and say, tell me more. So for example, we have an alert from our DNS product and we want to know more about this domain name. So let's go out to all those products and say, what do you know about this domain name? And add that additional context and that additional enrichment to the incident. So the analyst has that much more information available to them. And then once we have all that information, we want to take a response action that can be triggered by a user in a guided playbook or by running a workflow that could be triggered automatically by the incident itself being generated. You can run an XDR automation workflow in response to an incident being generated if you want to do automated enrichment, but customize it. So maybe get data from a custom data source, or even just take an automated response. So for example, you might have an incident for a machine having malware on it or having ransomware being detected. You can have a workflow run and automatically quarantine that machine, for example. You can also schedule these workflows. There's any number of different ways these workflows can be triggered. So this entire process end to end is pretty flexible. And when you get to the automation and the response part, there's a significant amount of flexibility and customization into how that workflow actually runs and how those actions get taken. So for extended context, things are based on telemetry. This here is showing that we have any number of different telemetry sources and the different types of telemetry that those sources can provide. So we have a representation here of cloud, we have our integrations, right? There's any number of different things. So this is not just a cloud-focused solution. We do have some on-prem capabilities as well. So we can take public cloud flow data, we can take that from some on-prem, we can take it direct to cloud from endpoints with NVM. There's a bunch of different ways you can get flow logs and telemetry into the product. And then, of course, as mentioned previously, we have our integrations and our intelligence sources that are providing additional context as well. So all this data comes together in Cisco XDR. when we look at the different types of sources, it's important to remember that different products and source types provide different types of telemetry or enrichment. So for example, when you look at something like email, we can get enrichment and email can give us alerts, but we're not getting, flows or logs or kind of raw telemetry. Whereas with secure client and endpoint, we can get NVM flows in addition to alerts and enrichments. And with secure network analytics or flows through Cisco Telemetry Broker, we can get flows through there. So depending on the product you integrate and depending on the type of product will dictate what capabilities are available. And you can see something like, Jamf Pro or Meraki SM, for example, is giving us device context, and that's about it. Not that that's not valuable, but it is important to remember that not every single product supports every single capability. Those capabilities are supported based on the product's capabilities and what the product has to offer us. The integrations are core to XDR. Without the integrations, we really wouldn't have data to work with. So having a large and robust catalog of integrations is key. At this point, we have over 80 integrations from a wide variety of products. You saw some of the logos on some of the previous slides. So there's a pretty good representation of different products across domains and across vendors. And it is an open platform. And we actually have more third-party integrations than Cisco integrations. So we do have a strong focus on bringing third-party vendors into this ecosystem. There's a strong focus on being vendor agnostic as much as possible so that we give our customers the most value, right, with the investments that they've already made in even potentially competing products, but we want them to be able to realize value from those products in XDR as well. So there's a big mix of products, different vendors, different technologies, and it's all basically API based. So a lot of what we're doing outside of the raw telemetry and outside of some of the more advanced capabilities is API-based communication. So this is a lot of kind of cloud-to-cloud stuff. It's pretty easy to configure and set up. But the XDR journey starts with these integrations. It starts with adding things from the catalog and giving XDR the sources of data that it needs. Doing that actual configuration is generally quite straightforward. Some products are what we call one-click integrations, which means you can kind of say, I want to connect this. You'll get sent to the product. The product will say, do you want to let XDR take your data? And then you say yes, and it sends you back to XDR and the integration's configured. It's actually more than one click. It's a couple clicks, but it's pretty straightforward. The other way is configuration based. And this is where you need to provide XDR some sort of information. A lot of times it's an API key. It could be a client ID and client secret. It could be any number of different kinds of secrets or passwords or credentials, depending on the product and its capabilities. So that'll vary depending on the product. The sample we have here is for Cisco Secure Cloud Insights. And in this case, you just need to provide a bearer token that's generated in the product. So configuration is pretty straightforward. And everything in XDR is API based, not just the way we integrate with other products, the way that we collect data, but APIs are core to XDR itself. So you can actually do many of the things that you're doing in the user interface of XDR through the API. So there's a very rich, robust set of APIs available, not just for us to aggregate data from other platforms, but that you can then leverage to get visibility into your incidents and any number of other things within XDR. So we don't hold the data hostage, which I think is important. As part of our extended context, we have XDR assets. So we actually have two different flavors of this now. We have XDR assets for devices and for users. So this here is talking about devices. And the idea here is that when you integrate something like Microsoft Intune or Jamf Pro or even Cisco Secure Endpoint, we can get a lot of really valuable information about an asset from those sources, right? These are not pieces of information that you're generally going to see flying across the network, right? You're not going to get this data even from raw telemetry or from firewall logs. So this is giving you information about maybe the make and model, the serial number, and it's going to bring together information from a bunch of different sources and give you a one-page view of your devices. So in this view, you might see, okay, I have a Windows machine. It's got Cisco Secure Endpoint on it for its endpoint detection product. And maybe I've also seen it in Microsoft Intune because it's a managed device. So there's a lot of different visibility you can get here by combining those different sources of data, combining your security products and your kind of environmental protection products with posture information and other device information from your mobile device or desktop device manager. So this is a really valuable way to get insights into your devices. And this repository of data is useful for incident scoring and generation, because we now have more ability to determine what is the value of the asset. Right? So if this example here, we have this screenshot, we see device value of 10, that's the highest value possible. So if an incident is generated and it involves this asset, that incident is going to have a higher score and a higher priority because it's related to a higher priority asset. So this asset data and device data is really important, not just because you can do some really cool stuff and really cool reporting with it, because it's a valuable source for your incidents themselves. These are the sources we support for that device data. So you'll notice, and what I think is cool about this is it's a pretty healthy mix of kind of typical device managers, what you'd expect: Intune, Jamf, MobileIron, now called Ivanti, and VMware Workspace ONE. But we're mixing that with your security products. So getting you some context from Duo, if you're running Duo Health, from your endpoint products, whether it's CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, or Secure Endpoint, from DNS, from Secure Client and Orbital. So a lot of different sources of information here that all get merged into one really useful view into your incidents, or your assets, sorry. Orbital is a really important piece of this. So Orbital is available as part of Cisco Secure Endpoint, and Orbital allows you to run OS query scripts and queries on your endpoints. And we actually get a lot of data in XDR devices from Orbital by running scheduled queries to collect information. You can see at the bottom of the screenshot on the right-hand side that tile in XDR devices is showing some of the data that came from Orbital. So Orbital is a really valuable part of the strategy to get asset data into the platform. It is deployed currently as part of Cisco Secure Endpoint. So something just to keep in mind: not only is Cisco Secure Endpoint a valuable source, but Orbital is an optional component. So choosing to deploy Orbital onto the machines is a pretty valuable thing to do, and provides a lot of really rich context into the platform you can't get without Orbital. The other key component of extended context is the intelligence itself. So it's not just enough for us to go out and say, well, here's a pile of IP addresses and here's a pile of domain names. Well, who cares? What are you going to do with that information? What you actually need is intelligence. You need the ability to tell the user or tell the customer, hey, this IP address is bad, or this domain name is known to be good. So it's not just about collecting all of these observables, right? We call these individual pieces of intelligence an observable, whether it's an IP address, an email address, a username, doesn't matter. We can't just put all that data in front of the user without any context. And these intelligence sources are what give us that context. One of the largest and most robust that we use, obviously, Talos. So Talos provides us a huge amount of intelligence about observables, whether it's domains, IPs, whatever. And we expose that in the UI. So when you look at the product and you look at an IP address or one of these other types of observables, you'll see that it says malicious and it has a little skull on it. Or you might see that it's suspicious, or maybe it's unknown. Maybe we don't know what it is, or maybe it's clean because we know that it's a reputable and vetted source. So these intelligence sources are also another key part of the strategy, right? Collect the context, collect all of the things we're seeing, but then enhance it and annotate it with what are these things actually? Are they bad? Are they good? What do we actually need to pay attention to? Control Center is our kind of visibility portion of XDR. So this is where you kind of start your XDR journey. This is a dashboard. These dashboards can be customized. You can add and remove tiles here. We have some tiles that are specific to XDR itself. That'll show you some things about, like example here, unassigned incidents and things like that. So there is some kind of statistical stuff about your XDR environment you can see here. And then you also can add product-specific tiles as well. So if you wanted to bring in some tiles from Umbrella or from Cisco Secure Endpoint or whatever products you might have integrated that support dashboard tiles, you can kind of mix and match and build these custom dashboards. These are nice because you can do them different ways. You can have one dashboard that shows multiple different products to give you a more holistic picture. You can have a dashboard that only shows tiles from a single product to get a really deep view into that specific product. So a lot of visibility you can get and customization here. XDR Investigate is kind of our ad hoc investigation tool inside of XDR. This allows you to basically give XDR a query and then get a visualized result. So for example, you might be conducting an investigation and have a list of observables you want to know more about, whether that's maybe, let's say, a host name, an IP address, and a domain name, maybe an email address. You can put those individual pieces of information into XDR Investigate, click Investigate, and we will go out to all of your integrated products and go out to the different telemetry sources and basically say, what do you know? And then we'll combine that data with what we know from the intelligence sources that we have from previous sightings and from previous incidents, right? We'll take all of that data from the integrated products and the private intelligence that you've built up in your XDR instance, and we'll show you this incident view. And this incident view is pretty powerful because it actually gives you a visual representation of how things are interacting. So you can maybe see that a specific machine accessed a malicious URL, or maybe an email came from a certain address and it was opened by a certain person, right? So this will give you a really nice visual view that an analyst can kind of look at and click through and zoom in and zoom out and explore. And then the raw events themselves are provided below. So this is a great way to conduct an investigation ad hoc and just say, what does the platform and what does the environment know about something? You can save these for later. You can share them. They're pretty flexible, but a really neat feature that we have. This is kind of at a certain point getting redundant, but global intelligence, this is intelligence that's available to everyone. So global intelligence is kind of stuff like Talos, for example, which is available to every XDR customer. There are certain types of intelligence that are what we call global or public intelligence that we make available to every customer. You'll have local security context, so that's more kind of your private intelligence, right? What's unique to you and your organization. So that is private within the organization. And then, of course, that all leads towards response actions. What can we actually do about this information once we have it? The real goal is ultimately bringing everything closer together. So when we say without XDR, an investigation might take 32 minutes, with XDR, maybe it takes 5. And the reason for that is before XDR, you might have to go pivot through 4 product dashboards looking for different pieces of information in different places, and then possibly even take 4 different remediation actions in 4 different places. So there was a lot of switching between products and figuring out where to go for what pieces of information. XDR collapses that. And XDR says, you know what? We're going to go get all that data for you. No more having to go to 4 different products. We're going to bring those 4 different products worth of data in, give you a single investigation, give you a single view and a single place to remediate, right? Whether it's isolating a machine and secure endpoint, blocking a domain and umbrella, whatever the case is, those actions are available right from within XDR. This is an example of what enrichment looks like. So, we've talked a lot about enrichment. That term's probably been in the slides and in here multiple times. Maybe we haven't really explained what exactly enrichment is, and really how does this investigation work. So this will kind of help visualize what does this process actually look like. So let's say we have an analyst or even an automation using our APIs, ask XDR a question. And XDR is then going to go out to all of the integrated products and intelligence sources and ask that same question, right? So what do you know about this IP address, this domain name, this username, whatever the case is? And we'll bring all that data back, and we're going to take all that and combine it, and that is going to become the investigation that you're doing, right? So we kind of go out, spread the question across all these products, and then bring all that data back together and give that back to the incident investigator or to the automation or script that call it the API. So focusing a little more on the detections. So we have behavioral analytics, cloud-based alerts, global threat alerts, and intel from Talos. So there's a bunch of different types of analytics and detections that we can generate from telemetry. So far we've been talking a lot about context and sources of data, right? Where is the data coming from? How are we getting it? and some of the things we're doing with it. But obviously, most importantly, the D in XDR is detections. So we have XDR Analytics, which is our data warehouse where these different raw pieces of telemetry can go. And as things go in and out of this data warehouse, we can apply any number of different types of analytics to the data to generate detection. So obviously, behavioral, looking for anomalies, looking for data movement in suspicious ways, looking for things behaving strangely from endpoints, using network visibility module detections from Cisco Secure Client. There's a bunch of different ways we can do that. We can also integrate with cloud platforms, so getting alerts from AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure. We have global threat alerts, which is kind of partially related to Talos, where we're looking for intelligence and generating detections based on intelligence we have, whether it's malware classification or knowledge that we have of things being naughty or nice on the public internet or what have you. So lots of different ways that we can generate detections here from different sources of intelligence. And this is just another view into these things, but kind of more domain focused. So looking at public cloud versus network and endpoint and firewall. So you can see there's some examples here, and then under public cloud, we've got plus 40 more for network and endpoint, plus 60 more, and then firewall plus 72 more with on-prem stuff. So a lot of different types of detections that we can generate here and create incidents for. This is the architecture for detection. So as I mentioned, we have this data warehouse with telemetry coming in. That goes out to a bunch of different kind of parsers or analytics engines that are looking for those different types of detections and generating those alerts. Alerts are correlated from attack to form attack chains. So when we start to see different individual alerts that may be related, so there might be kind of a progressive attack, something like a ransomware or other types of attacks that come in multiple phases, we can put those alerts together into what we call an attack chain. And then those things get evaluated and promoted to incidents. So then we have an incident created, right? And there's still a bunch of other stuff that gets done. So we have our original telemetry, we have alerts that get generated, we put that into an attack chain if necessary, we create an incident, and then we do automated enrichment. And that's where we, again, go back out to all those source products and say, okay, we have this set of observables. We have this set of information in this incident. Tell us everything else you know, whether that's getting data about assets and using those asset values that I mentioned before to do scoring, whether it's getting additional data from a product about different observables that are a part of the incident, right? There's a bunch of other things that get done here. And then the incident goes into the incident score. So this whole chain of detection and enrichment and scoring and prioritization happens, and then the incident shows up in XDR. So by the time the analyst gets the incident, it's incredibly rich and incredibly detailed, so that it's not just a wealth of information for them to have in front of them, but it's also actionable, or as actionable as possible, because it's as complete as possible. This is another view showing the source or the process rather from raw telemetry, right, through analytics, through observations, creating alerts, relating things to attack chains, and then of course incident creation, prioritization, and enrichment. So this is a linear view of what was just discussed. So there's a lot of different components that go into generating an incident here. This is just a little bit of a primer on the attack chaining that I mentioned. So when you think about a more sophisticated attack, it might be multi-phase, multi-step. And the idea with an attack chain is to bring these different pieces together. So this example here is showing persistence and command and control events. So we might have a malware that came into the environment, in this case, maybe from an email. That file itself was executed and known to be a little strange, but then maybe it was talking to a strange IP address, and maybe that IP address was talking to other machines on the network. And so you can see that this attack may start with a simple email attachment, but obviously has started to spread. And so by taking these different events and different alerts, putting them together, we can essentially start to build these chains. So we build them based on common observables. We build them based on different types of data and telemetry from different sources, and kind of start stringing things together. And ultimately that can result in what we call an attack chain. These can be seen in XDR analytics. So this example here is showing kind of step by step how there's the chaining pattern. So credential access, command and control, right? There's different chaining and different phases that go on here. And then we also kind of have like a timeline view that shows you the alerts over time. So you can actually kind of see not only the chain of different pieces, but you can start to look at how did this attack progress over time, which is kind of interesting. Incident creation itself can happen any number of ways. The examples we've been looking at so far were very much focused on that context and detection and analytics flow. You can also promote events from XDR analytics manually. You can also create incidents through the XDR API. All the incidents are assigned a priority score and automatically enriched. So that priority score is shown here. It's got two components. It has a detection risk and an asset value risk. Those two things are combined to give you that high level score. So this is kind of a nice way to be able to see which incidents perhaps might warrant attention first versus things that may be less severe that can be handled later. Let's see. Oops. Incidents in the incident list in XDR are prioritized using those scores. There's various options for sorting and filtering. So this is a pretty responsive way to look at your incident list. You can change the incident status or assignees right from the list. And the drawer also shows a bunch of key information. So when you click on an incident, you get this drawer on the right-hand side. And this drawer will kind of show a summary of the incident, including relevant MITRE tactics. It'll show you your priority score breakdown, the description, and if you scroll down, there's more information about targets and observables and things. So you can actually use, we call this a progressive disclosure flow. And the idea is that you can kind of get an at a glance of an incident without actually jumping out of the incident list into the full incident itself. So this is a flexible way to kind of poke through your incidents, look at the scores, look at the MITRE tactics and things, and see which incidents need to be addressed in what order. As mentioned, the score is based on detection risk and asset value. The detection risk is based on the MITRE tactics and severity of the sightings and things from the different sources. So looking at what kinds of detections have we seen and how risky are those detections, that's part of the score. The other part of the score is the asset value mentioned earlier. So when you have your assets in XDR devices, you might have an asset with a value of 2, which is much less important than an asset with a value of 10. So those asset values are taken into account here as well to produce that final priority score that you'll see in the incident list. Enrichment, again, provides additional context. So we talked about this earlier, but this is what some of what it actually looks like. So in this case, we're looking at an incident in XDR. We're looking at the detections, and you'll see there's that list of observables there. And this is either going to come from the original events or the original analytics that were done, or we have this investigated category, which is where we've gone out to the other integrated products and collected additional data, which is, again, what we call enrichment. And you'll see that it provides a pretty significant amount of data in some cases that adds to the depth of the incident. This is a flow view of the progressive disclosure that I mentioned. So you can start with an incident, you can click on it and see the drawer. The drawer has some overlays that you can kind of hover and click on to get like the MITRE data, for example. And then if you click view incident detail, that actually brings you into the full incident itself. So it's kind of a nice way to step through an incident step by step. So you're not immediately overwhelmed with every piece of information that we have. The incident overview looks a little similar to the investigate view we saw before. So we do give you a visual representation of the incident and how the different components of the incident interacted. So in this case, we've got some assets talking to URLs, some file hashes that probably executed or communicated with some endpoints. We have some email addresses and so on, right? So this is showing how these different things interacted with each other. And if you hover your mouse over the arrows, it'll tell you what type of relationship it is. Something like a connected to, executed by, received by, sent by, the different kind of verbs that you'd expect to be descriptive of relationships between these types of objects. And then at the bottom, we have key incident details, such as what assets were involved, the list of raw observables and how many events each of those observables belong to, and then indicators of compromise or indicators that describe the types of behavior that we're seeing based on the events and based on the way that those observables are interacting with each other. We already talked about detections. So this is showing the raw data. It's showing the enriched data. You can filter this. We have this little important only toggle, which is kind of cool. So that'll kind of filter out a lot of the noise. This is largely based on severity, but could also be based on the tactics and techniques related to a specific sighting here. So the important only toggle is a kind of neat thing to try if there's a lot of noise or repetitive data. And then when we get to response, we have this response tab with our guided incident response playbook. And this is kind of interesting because it's based off the SANS Pisserol model. And what's cool is we've actually only taken 4 of those phases. So we've taken the ICER of the model. So identify, contain, eradicate, and recover. And this is meant to be an interactive playbook for the analyst to step through. So they can start with identification. There's some steps in there they can follow to do some investigation and documentation. And then when they get to containment, these things actually become actionable. So if you click on select for contain incident assets, XDR is going to ask you which assets, right? Which assets do you want to contain? And then you can click which ones you want and click execute. And that's actually going to run an XDR automation workflow in the background that will take those actions for you. And this is cool because it's vendor agnostic. So even if those 2 selected assets, maybe one's in CrowdStrike and one's in Cisco Secure Endpoint, the workflow will figure that out. It'll go out to the products that you have based on the integrations that you have. It'll attempt to identify and locate those assets. And then when it finds them, it'll take the appropriate isolation action depending on the product that it's discovered in. So these are a really neat way to allow analysts to take immediate response to an incident without even leaving XDR and without even actually having access to the other product. So this is a way that you can kind of control access to these types of response actions without giving analysts access to every single product under the sun. So this is a pretty neat feature of the product is for incident response. This, of course, has logging. So when analysts take these different actions, there will be logs that get generated where you'll be able to see a workflow was started by a certain user and whether it was completed successfully or not, whether or not the hosts selected were isolated or not. So there is definitely auditing capability here and a log of actions being taken. We also have the pivot menus. So the pivot menus have been around for a while. And these are kind of a little icon that show up next to an observable and allow you to take actions on a specific observable. And you'll see these in various parts of XDR. You'll see them in investigations and incidents, and you actually will even see them in some other Cisco Secure products as well. You have the playbooks that we just talked about, and then of course we have automation. So that same XDR automation workflow that is powering that contain incident assets item in the playbook, that same engine can be used to build your own workflows. They can be simple, they can be complex, they can automate how you investigate, automate how you respond. There's a lot of flexibility there. This is at a high level what the response architecture looks like. So whether it's a pivot menu, a response playbook, or an automation workflow, there's a few different ways these can work. They can go to an integration itself. So for example, if you have CrowdStrike integrated, we can actually make a request internally within XDR and say, please send this request to CrowdStrike, and XDR will send that request for us. Or workflows can go directly to a product API if it's either maybe not integrated into XDR or maybe you want to talk to a product API that is not an integration that we support. So not only can you use these different response actions and these different types of automation with your existing integrations, but when you're building automation workflows, you can actually integrate with pretty much whatever you want, even if it's not something that we support in our integrations catalog. This is what the pivot menu looks like. So as I mentioned, there's a little icon next to an observable. You click it and you get this little contextual menu here. And the idea is that this is going to give you actions specific to that observable. So if you pivot on, let's say, a domain name or even possibly a URL, you might get an option to block that domain in Umbrella if you have Umbrella integrated. If it's an IP address, in this example, we've got some XDR automation workflows that show up. If it's a host name, you might have an option to isolate that host in Cisco Secure Endpoint. So it is contextual. It is based on not just the observable that you pivot on, but also based on the products that you have integrated and their capabilities. We already talked about the playbooks, so I'm not going to cover this again. Automation rules are a new feature in XDR automation. As mentioned before, one of the use cases I described was having workflows run or having response actions taken automatically when an incident's created. This is how that's done. You can create an XDR automation workflow to go out and do some sort of investigation or go out and take some sort of response action. And you can link that workflow to incident creation, as an example, with an automation rule. So the idea is you can come into XDR automation and say, when a webhook is received for this URL, run this workflow. Or when an incident gets created and the score is greater than 800 and the description has the word endpoint in it, run this workflow. So it's a very flexible framework that helps you decide how and when your workflows run and what kinds of triggers actually get them running. XDR automation itself, we call it a no to low code drag and drop editor. So you do not have to write any code necessarily to use this. So it's not, scripting and things like that. It is a drag and drop editor. We give you this canvas that you can move things around and build your workflow. And this powers the playbook feature. So those guided response playbooks where you can contain an asset or contain different things are powered by these workflows. Those workflows are written by Cisco, maintained by Cisco. You don't need to write all that functionality yourself. Those are pre-written and available out of the box. However, you can build your own workflows as well. And there's a lot of use cases you can use with these workflows that it may not be security or even XDR related. There's any number of things you can do. We don't limit these workflows to security. We do not limit these workflows to only being able to leverage the integrations that you have enabled or even the integrations in our integrations catalog. So very, very flexible platform. At a high level, this is kind of what workflows look like, or this is kind of how you can think about their design and how you might build them. So on the left, we start with a trigger. Every workflow starts with a trigger, whether you're clicking the run button manually, whether it's because of an incident being created, it could be an email arriving in an inbox, it could be a schedule or even an API request. You just make an API request to XDR and say, please run this workflow. So the trigger gets the workflow going. Generally speaking, a workflow starts by consuming some sort of input variables. Those variables are then used by the workflow itself. Those can be activities, atomic actions. There's a couple different kind of building blocks and pieces you can use when you're building your workflows. And then the result is typically output variables of some sort. There may not be. So when you isolate a host in Cisco Secure Endpoint, for example, there isn't going to be an output variable. Right? If the workflow succeeds, we know the isolation happened. If the workflow fails, we know that the isolation didn't happen. So don't think of these input and output variables as required, but you can pass information into a workflow and get information out of it. All of the things that the workflow communicates with while it's running are what we call targets. So targets could be an HTTP-based API, could be a mailbox if you're checking for new messages or sending an email, could be SSHing to a terminal of some sort. There's a bunch of different target types. And if authentication is required, you can use what we call account keys for that. There's different types of account keys for different targets. And ideally, all of this culminates in an outcome. So you have your trigger, you have your use case, you have your workflow built and designed to do whatever it is you want it to do. And the idea is that at the end of it, we deliver some sort of outcome through that automation. So that's a lot. Right? XDR is a complicated topic. It's a lot of information to consume, and it can do a lot. It's a very capable, not just product in the Cisco XDR sense, but XDR as an industry term and as a thing we're doing in the security industry is a very complex and capable type of product. But ultimately, what we want this to do is boil down to a few things. We want it to boil down to faster detections. We want your organization to have the ability to reduce time to detect. But once we have those detections, we want them to be richer. We want to apply advanced analytics to them. We want to do attack chaining, put related events and alerts together. We want to prioritize them better, correlate the data better. We want to not just get this data faster, but we want it to be richer, and we want the analysts to be better informed and have more information available to them. We also then want to simplify the investigation process. Part of that is done by the faster detection part, right? The more information we can gather and the more correlation and the more analytics we can do up front, the easier it is to investigate, because generally speaking, you'll have more information, more of the information you need available to you. So we want to empower the SOC to quickly identify the source of a threat, figure out what the impact is, all of the relevant objects, whether they're assets in terms of devices or users, right? We want them to be able to really simplify gathering all that information. And that's both for an incident and that ad hoc investigation feature that I mentioned, and through the APIs. You can use XDR APIs to conduct an entire investigation, right, from an external system. So lots of flexibility here, but also simplification of the process as well. And then once we've done our detections and once we've done our investigation, given the analyst that information, we want rapid containment. So we not only want to reduce time to detect, we want to reduce the time to remediate and the time it takes to actually take a meaningful action in the environment to prevent the spread of malware or whatever maliciousness has been brought into the environment. So using automation, using those guided response playbooks, using those pivot menus, all of those automation and playbook-based capabilities to reduce the time it takes to take a tangible and meaningful action in response to a confirmed incident. We also want to be able to take all of those different telemetry sources and streamline everything. So this is really just a different view into the previous three pillars, but bringing in the different product telemetry, analyzing it, correlating it, and then streamlining out the other side. But in the meantime, we're using threat intelligence from really robust sources like Cisco Talos. We're using that asset and user context from your device management platforms, and now with the beta of XDR user insights, being able to get data from Azure and some other sources about user context. And then, of course, relating these things to the MITRE framework so that it's familiar and understandable in terms of the SOC. As far as resources go, there's a bunch of resources here. I'm not going to go through them all, but a bunch of different resources to get started with XDR. So you can use these different links to access those different resources. And that's it. So there, Cisco XDR. Yay.